Hi, and welcome to the Spin Nation podcast. We are the podcast that slices through the noise to reveal the forces shaping Canadians' perspectives. Well, we are on the Labor Day weekend. The air show is happening. The planes are flying through the air. How are you enjoying this long weekend, husband Emmanuel?
Hi, lovely wife Laurel. This is a great weekend. Lovely weather, if a bit noisy, but it's time to enjoy the last dregs of the summer before we get into the big work year.
Now, speaking of work, you have a second job these days.
That's right. I'm a social media director for an emerging political voice.
Right. So the very emerging. I don't know if she's emerging. I think like she's been around for quite a while, maybe subtly behind the scenes, influencing politics and happenings in the great island of Ile Perrot. But
Uh,
your mom, she's making big steps.
That's right. Lise Chartier, my mom, she is running for the local municipal district, District 3 in Notre Dame de l'Île Perrot. And I've been helping her out with her some of her social media campaign, recording TikToks and Instagram reels and Facebook.
I think it's pretty impressive. I know she didn't plan on getting to politics, but your mom just has very clear ideas on how to make things better for people in Ile Perrot and the surrounding area. So we are definitely behind you. Lise, we know that you are a listener of the show. So best of luck in your upcoming elections. Pretty exciting. Now, when your mom is going door to door, I'm curious, is this issue of immigration coming up? Because it sure is in the rest of Canada.
I asked her, and it is not coming up as an issue at least at the municipal level so far as part of her door knocking.
All right. Well, it is definitely top of mind for Canadians across the country, which is why we chose it as the topic of our episode this week. So let's start with our data point of the week, Le Chiffre de la Semaine, keeping with that Quebec theme here. And that is only 2% of that online conversation about immigration. And we're looking across all different channels here, social and traditional media, but only 2% of what we saw are highlighting the economic benefits of immigration. Lots of talk about the downside, but very, very little conversation about the upside.
And so that brings us to our business question for the week. So, when it comes to immigration, it sounds like Canadians are really mad, but what are they most upset about? First, maybe do we want to set the scene in terms of the latest data that was released by the government of Canada?
Yeah, so the Canadian government, they said they were going to pull back on letting in as many newcomers as they had in the past. They used to report that on a very regular cadence, but it was delayed this year by a few months. It caused a bit of an uproar, saying that the government was not being transparent. But in August, they finally did release this data, announcing how many new people have come under the various different immigration programs that we have in Canada. And it looks like the number of permanent residents and temporary foreign worker permits has been pretty stable. And those temporary foreign worker permits are definitely controversial these days. But they have definitely pulled back on study permits and those international mobility permits. So those are the students that are coming in as well. That has dropped. And this is, as per the policy, the government announced that they were going to pull back. But so this is kind of the state of the nation in terms of how people are coming into the country.
So it sounds like there is some movement. There are some activity at the government level to bring some of these numbers down. But you ran a number of different queries in our search engine to figure out what Canadians are actually saying. And what did you find there? Because to me, it does sound like the conversation has not slowed down, but has actually hyped up. Am I right in this? What did the numbers show?
So it seems this has been a fairly hot topic, going on for quite a while. So no big surprise, no big surprise there. But what I do want to show you is, as we looked at it from the perspective of jobs and healthcare and housing. Now, if you listen to our episode last week on housing, we did dive deeper into what is perceived to be the role of immigration. There is obviously some data to show that when you have a high influx of immigration, it can drive prices up, but it's not the only factor driving them up. However, when you look at it across, that housing crisis, is it making it harder to get jobs? Is it making harder to get access to healthcare? It's really the employment issue that people are talking a lot about. And as I said, this temporary foreign workers permitting seems to be the most contentious, especially right now over the summer where youth unemployment has been so high and there's been a lot of young Canadians unable to find those entry level jobs. And particularly people are talking about working in fast food places, working at summer camps. Those are the sort of entry level jobs that you get when you're a teenager. Those are disappearing, and the perception is that companies are hiring these temporary foreign workers. And I've seen in the last week where individual companies are getting called out.
Oh, yes. The brands are being mentioned.
Exactly. So Subway was one. Tim Hortons. Some people are calling for boycotts of Tim Hortons. People aren't buying it. So there's some tension that's happening there on the employment side. It's a tough job market. People are feeling the pinch in general. And our unemployment rate, I actually don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's not fabulous. I mean, it's not horrible, it's not fabulous. Either way, people see a disconnect.
Yeah.
So the question is that disconnect perceived? Is that real? I mean, that's the question that the government needs to answer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I suspect there's a lot of folks nervous about AI and what it can do to a lot of the white collar worker jobs, especially the entry level ones. So I'm sure a lot of folks are nervous about all that.
Now, the other thing I saw, which it surprised me at first, but when you think about it, maybe not so much, but only about 26% of people were talking about access to healthcare. Obviously, our publicly funded healthcare system is always controversial, contentious. In a past life, I was the spokesperson for the Ontario Minister's Office, the Ministry of Health. So I do have some firsthand experience. And the fact is, there's never enough. There's always been an issue with wait times. And so the question of it, if we are not able to accommodate the existing population's healthcare needs, does bringing in more people and an influx of people put more pressure on the system? I actually personally expected this number to be higher, but then you think about it, people usually only worry about it when they're trying to access healthcare.
Could there be a component where, in this case, immigration kind of works on both sides of the coin? So we got obviously more pressure because there's more people in Canada, but on the other hand, we have more workers in healthcare, a very demanding line of work, whether you're a nurse that needs to take care of a whole bunch of patients, or a specialist that needs a lot of knowledge to diagnose various disease and conditions. So, could it be that both sides of that coin are being played in that immigration conversation?
Well, that's a bit of a Pandora's box in the sense that I think Canada, as part of its immigration drive, tries to recruit healthcare professionals from other parts of the world. But the problem is when you get here, you need to get accredited by the colleges. And that's a very difficult process.
Yeah. And what's your sense of how different provinces are in terms of the scale?
It was fairly consistent, actually. I didn't see massive regional shifts in Quebec. This issue about jobs and employment was the biggest at like 50% of the conversation, followed by the Atlantic. So Atlantic provinces around 40%. So a little bit further east, they're more concerned about jobs. But other than that, it was pretty consistent.
Yes, I could provide a bit more color on the Quebec conversation. It actually seems so. Quebec has always been a province very cautious about immigration to make sure that language and culture were protected as part of the general French community. But it sounds like actually this time around, Quebec is actually in favor of immigration, so a lot of pressure when it comes to an aging population, the need for workers and to take care of our elders. So it actually seems like right now the big story in immigration in Quebec is how they had approved a whole bunch of students, and because the file was not coordinated properly with the federal authorities, a lot of these new entrants have to hop out and back into the country to get their process properly treated by the federal government. So that seems to be the big news item. It's actually they want more people in right now, and they're having some issues coordinating with the government, with the federal government. Yeah, and that's a good segue, I think, to our next chart where we look at the split of topics between some of the different channels that are out there.
Well, I want to talk a bit about, I mean, growing up Canadian. Growing up, I was always taught to believe, and we had this conversation actually recently at a party a few months ago, if you remember, and it was that the multicultural mosaic is such an important part of Canada and being Canadian, and what distinguishes that Canadian identity, especially in contrast to the melting pot in the United States. Like I remember being taught that, I guess, in like a civics class. And what we were trying to do with this particular exercise and this analysis was to assess if those positives about immigration are being debated as forcefully and excitedly as the negatives. And I have to say it's not looking great. And by the positives, we're talking about, the economic benefits, recruiting the best talent, which we just talked about. The fact that, people here come here, they're starting new business, the fact that we need to replace our population, that Canadians are not having a birth rate that's going to replace our population. So you need to supplement that with immigration. There's a lot of the cultural positives of living in Canada with people from all over the world. Here in Toronto, I always love you could go to a different neighborhood and you're like in an entire different country. And that merging of cultures and identities was what made living here really exciting. But that perspective is being replaced with a lot of the negatives. And I think to me, that is a big shift in the last year, more this year than previous years.
So, Laurel, you took the data for immigration and you broke it down into 6 different topics and then across 4 different media channels. And the reason that we do that is usually to see how the left versus the right treats or considers these different topics. So I want to pick one topic where we see a lot of divergence, and that topic is immigration as an invasion. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how the marked difference between traditional media and Twitter?
Look this up because I was seeing this pop up on my For You page on X. And it was this introduction of looking at newcomers coming to Canada and immigrants coming to Canada, that this isn't a program that is planned, that is positive, but they literally are using words like they are invading our country. And I've seen this not just in Canada, I have seen this in other countries, but it was becoming quite prevalent. And in particular, on X, on Twitter. So close to 30% of all the conversation around immigration is mentioning this idea that immigrants are invading. I use that quote. They are invading our country. So incredibly negative perception. Incredibly, I would say, um, us versus them uh, approach to it.
Yeah, and that's a little bit off the charts, and especially if we compare it to our chiffre de la semaine, where only 2% of the conversation is about the benefits of immigration. That's a big mismatch, and certainly a challenge for Canadian unity if we have these big groups that have such a diverging opinion.
Absolutely. And personally, I find that quite concerning because it is the kind of language that has almost a violent overtone to it.
Hmm.
That an invasion suggests that now we need to step up and do something.
Yes.
So that I personally flag that as concern. Not mentioned at all in traditional media. So if you're only reading traditional media, you might not even know that this is brewing.
That's right. I think if you're a policymaker and you get your traditional media monitoring report and you kind of see it and it's a tiny number, it's like 2%. But really, there's an audience in Canada that feels incredibly strongly about this. 30% is huge. Um, so if you're not seeing that number and you cannot react to it and you don't have campaigns to highlight the other side of the coin here, that is not a good sign for Canadian unity.
We can move on to another huge topic across all is the idea of safety. So, and then when we talk about safety, we're talking about is Canada less safe now than it was before? And do people think about that tied to immigration? And that's, over 30% on three of our channels. Even on Reddit, it's the smallest, it's still 20% of the conversation. So, absolutely, there is this correlation that's being created in people's minds here that immigration leads to a less safe country. But I will say that safety on Blue Sky is different. Actually, it's a very different tone to it. It is not that immigration makes us less safe. It's more positive. It's that Canada is a safe place for new immigrants and for refugees.
Significantly. So 25% in most of the channels, and even stronger 30% or so on Blue Sky.
All over 30% except Reddit. Reddit is the smallest at 21. The rest of them are all over 30%.
So let's look at a topic that is about immigration as a positive, so multiculturalism. What I'm seeing in the chart here is we have 10 to 15% of the incumbent media conversation on that topic. Also, a strong component of the Blue Sky, which is not surprising. Blue Sky left leaning, but a tiny slice for Reddit and Twitter on multiculturalism. What does that suggest to you, Laurel?
It suggests that what I was talking about before about what used to be the narrative of immigration as this positive multicultural mosaic is disappearing. It's being drowned out by these other narratives that are sucking up space. It's I think a sad state of affairs. I personally have always thought of it as being one of the absolute strength of this country, but that is being lost right now.
So it sounds like there is no proactive conversation on the benefits of immigration right now. And what used to be part of our Canadian cultural story, it doesn't have any champions now, including the government. The government is sending a lot of messages about, numbers and statistics and, how the whole process of getting into Canada. But I'm not sure that I've seen yet a strong message of how immigration fits in our national narrative, whether we're opening the door or closing the door a little bit. I'm not sure I've seen that message come out of Ottawa or any of the provinces, the pro immigration provinces.
I think they're struggling to understand what it looks like in 2025. So the multicultural mosaic of the 80s that we're referring to, that Canada is not the same Canada that we're in now. It's very different demographic makeup. No one has really spent the time because probably people have been burning out fires for the last 4 or 5 years to think about what is that new Canadian identity. And I'm going to mention this party we were at a few months ago. And there's someone who was an immigrant, not a new immigrant, but she was an immigrant to Canada. And she was telling us how when she first moved here, she wanted to find out what is the Canadian identity? What does it mean to be Canadian? And she had a lot of trouble understanding, and she was actively trying to find ways, what does it mean to be Canadian?
So she could fit in.
Yeah. So she could understand, how do I be Canadian? And she could not find it. She said she really couldn't find it. Like it was a problem when she was trying to assimilate and adjust to living in Canada. And I think, that's just one example, but the fact that multiculturalism and the construct of that is is falling away is maybe that data point that we need to have a little bit of kick in the ass to take a better look at that.
All right. So, note to our policymakers: we need to find that narrative, and that narrative is probably just like multiculturalism, a thread woven across many different regions of Canada and the many different social demographics that needs to be identified and promoted. Otherwise, we're not going in a direction of unity and understanding.
One final comment before we move away. We don't have the data for it specifically, but I will say that the conversation on immigration on TikTok is quite different.
Mm.
It is there's quite a few large accounts, but they are there, I would say, to give information for new immigrants. So they're accounts that are run by either companies that help people immigrate to Canada, or there are accounts that cater to new immigrant South Asian populations. And on those accounts, they talk a lot about new immigrant life, things you need to know as a new immigrant. Some of them are actually pretty just straight up news sharing, or there's information on getting a resident, living here. So quite a different story happening on TikTok, compared to these other channels that we talked about.
So let's close our session with our so what for this episode. We've got, some very divergent perceptions across channels, which means very divergent perceptions across political leanings. What's the so what for Canada? What needs to happen next?
So personally, I think this huge discussion and invasion is a big red flag. And I also want to flag that some of the highest engaged accounts, we talk about who's driving some of these narratives, is accounts that are part of the Alberta separatist movement. So they are leveraging immigration as, let's say, a wedge in Alberta to, instead of bring people together, to drive them apart. So I think that has to be flagged.
Very interesting and very concerning.
How about you? What's your big so what about this? What you're seeing?
Well, I think part of what is happening now is the influence of what's happening south of the border in the United States. One finding that we have at Spin Nation is that a lot of the influence on social media, Twitter in particular, but even in the podcast world, a lot of the top shows and a lot of the top voices that are consumed in Canada are American voices. And they're having their own issue with immigration and what it means to be, I guess, a citizens of the United States. And I think some of this is overflowing here in Canada. And what my hope is that we get strong Canadian voices overtaking the American voices, so that we weave our own story, not just reflect what the U.S. is. And this is true on both sides of the pro-immigration and those that are against. There are some valid concerns, absolutely, but these should be discussion that we should be between Canadians and reflect specifically what's happening here in Canada, and not just be a mirror or a reflection of what's happening in the U.S.
I think that's absolutely an important point, is not letting that spill over. I'll add one other thing, that this idea of having shared norms and values, that there is a tension that is happening in this country right now, is that there was a huge influx of new immigrants that came in. It was, the government's decision to, try to welcome as many as they could. It probably was too many too fast. It put pressure on those weak points that we already had. We talked about healthcare, housing, and jobs in particular. But this also idea of like what's normal in your day to day life. Like you and I lived in China. It took a while to figure out how do I interact with people? What's normal? What's a normal way to like wait in a line? What's a normal way to order food or just exist around people. I remember you were scared to leave the apartment, I think, for the first couple of weeks we were in Beijing. And
Well,
uh,
I struggled because using a revolving door in China, you go like a whole group at a time, and I'm used to Canada, where it's one person per flip. Just that, it's a tiny thing, but it makes a huge difference in how you behave on your everyday.
I think a lot of that's happening here, where
Sure.
what were completely normal ways to exist in home countries are just not the Canadian way of doing things. That we always hold the door open for someone behind us, even if they're like 20 minutes behind, you're still going to stand there as a Canadian and hold the door open for them. So I think that those differences are being aggressively highlighted by social media as people take videos and post them online. I think there's got to be learnings on both sides. People who come to Canada need to learn the Canadian way, and Canadians need to be a little more understanding and just help newcomers to assimilate, understand what's culturally normal here. What are the values that we live by here? I think we can get there.
And this happens every so often in history. We had a lot of immigrants at the turn of the 19th century with the Irish. I think a lot of Europeans started making their way over just before and obviously after the World War. We took in a lot of immigrants from the war ravaged Europe and in particular Eastern Europe. But Canada overcame them, and we developed our idea of multiculturalism, which was ingrained into us in the 70s and 80s. Definitely part of my curriculum as a kid, and I think we'll eventually come up to our new common shared vision for Canada. It will take a little while, though.
All right. Well, great sentiment. So let's end on that note. As always, if you haven't already, please follow, like, and share our content. It is the best way to support us. We appreciate every single one of you who is listening. Thank you, as always, Emmanuel. Great conversation.
Until next time.
Until next time.